The most effective narcissists you'll encounter this year won't match any description you've ever read about narcissism. They won't be loud, they won't be obviously controlling. They'll talk about boundaries, emotional safety, and self-care. And they'll use every single one of those concepts to keep you exactly where they want you. Over the past decade, an enormous amount of psychological vocabulary has entered mainstream conversation. Words like gaslighting, love bombing, trauma bonding, narcissistic supply, terms that used to exist only in clinical literature, are now part of everyday language. That was supposed to be a good thing. It was supposed to give people the tools to recognize manipulation and protect themselves. But something happened that almost nobody anticipated. The people these terms were designed to describe started learning them too, and they didn't learn them to change. They learned them so they could adapt. To understand why this shift matters, you need to understand one thing about narcissistic psychology that most popular content gets completely wrong. Narcissism is not a fixed set of behaviors. It's an operating system. The behaviors are just the interface, and the interface updates. The core mechanism of narcissistic personality structure is the maintenance of a false self, an identity constructed to extract validation, control, and psychological dominance from the people around it. The specific behaviors a narcissist uses depend entirely on what their environment rewards. In the 1980s and 90s, that meant aggression and authority. In the early 2000s, it meant confidence and status. Right now, in this specific cultural moment, the most effective mask a narcissist can wear is the language of emotional intelligence. And that has made them significantly harder to identify, because they now sound exactly like the people trying to help you spot them. The narcissist most people are scanning for is essentially a cartoon at this point. Loud, arrogant, self-absorbed, dismissive, someone who makes everything about themselves in ways you can see from across the room. Those people exist, but they represent the least dangerous version of this psychology, precisely because they're obvious. The narcissists causing the most sustained psychological damage right now look nothing like that. They don't say you're too sensitive. They say, I hear you and I need you to hear me too. They don't dismiss your emotions. They reframe them. They'll tell you that your anger is actually fear, that your frustration is actually a trauma response, that your legitimate concerns are signs you haven't done enough inner work yet. And because they're using the right vocabulary, it sounds like wisdom. It feels like someone who cares deeply about your emotional well-being. It isn't. There's a specific mechanism underneath this: instrumental empathy. It's the ability to accurately read another person's emotional state, not in order to connect with them, but to use that reading strategically. A person high in instrumental empathy and low in genuine emotional empathy can say all the right things. They can validate your feelings, mirror your language, reference attachment styles, talk about their healing journey with what sounds like raw honesty. None of it is felt. All of it is performed. And the performance has gotten remarkably sophisticated because the script is now publicly available. Every therapy post, every psychology video, every list of red flags, it's training material, not just for potential victims, but for the people those posts are describing. Here's where this becomes dangerous. When someone weaponizes therapeutic language, your ability to name what's happening starts to collapse. If your partner says, I need space to regulate my nervous system, every time you raise a real concern, you're being controlled. But the language they're using is language you've been taught to respect. So you don't push back, you accommodate, you start to wonder if maybe you are the problem. That doubt, targeted, manufactured, delivered in the gentlest possible tone, is the entire point. There's a pattern in psychology called DARVO: deny, attack, reverse victim, and offender. The classic version is obvious. Someone hurts you, denies it, attacks you, then claims they're the victim. But the evolved version is nearly invisible. The denial sounds like a calm explanation. The attack feels like concern. The reversal feels like vulnerability. I'm not saying you're wrong for feeling that way. I'm just noticing that every time I try to share my experience, I end up being the one who apologizes. And that's something I've been working through. It's been really painful for me. Every sentence sounds like healing. Every sentence is a weapon. Another form this takes is something called communal narcissism. Instead of building their identity around power or success, these individuals build it around being the most caring, the most understanding, the most emotionally evolved person in the room. They don't seek admiration for what they do. They seek admiration for who they appear to be. These are the people who advocate for emotional safety publicly, while privately punishing anyone who challenges them. They'll talk about healthy communication, and then use silence as control. They'll preach boundaries and then weaponize them to avoid accountability. The gap between who they present as and how they behave isn't a flaw, it's the design. And what makes this especially effective right now is that the culture protects it. Questioning them feels like questioning emotional intelligence itself. Calling them out feels like being against healing. This is where things get uncomfortable, because these mechanisms don't exist only in extreme cases. They exist on a spectrum, and that spectrum includes you. You've used the language of boundaries to avoid a conversation you didn't want to have. You framed a selfish decision as self-care because it made it harder to challenge. You've said, "I need to protect my energy," when what you really meant was, "I don't want to deal with this right now." That doesn't make you disordered, but it does mean you understand how powerful this language is. You've felt it work. The difference is scale and structure. Occasional avoidance is human. Building your identity around avoiding accountability is something else entirely. So if the old markers no longer work, if narcissists now sound like therapists and present as emotionally aware, how do you actually identify them? You stop listening to what they say, and you start watching what happens to the people around them. This is the one thing that cannot be faked. The vocabulary can evolve, the mask can improve, the performance can become flawless, but the impact stays the same. Gradual isolation, increasing self-doubt, a slow erosion of confidence, a constant feeling of not being enough, despite being told that you are loved. Healthy relationships make you more yourself over time, more grounded, more certain of your own reality. If someone speaks the language of emotional safety, but the people closest to them seem anxious, diminished, or unsure of where they stand, that gap is your answer. Not the words, never the words. The wake, the most effective disguise a manipulator can wear today, is the language that was meant to expose them. Psychology gave people armor. Some used it to protect themselves. Others studied it, learned its shape, and built a mask out of it. A mask that works because we've been taught not to question it. Pay less attention to how someone describes themselves. Pay more attention to the people who've gone quiet around them. Watch the wake,